Hello, this video is for the Chapter 7 Response Study Assessment. In this video, I'll be going over the 10 areas that was given, starting with Area 1 about emotional labor. Is my level of emotional labor high enough to affect any of my personal relationships? Honestly, I have always heard the term emotional labor, but I didn't really know the meaning of it, or the importance of it until I read it in chapter 7. I was able to understand it a lot better and understand how emotional labor really works and how it really does affect our personal relationships and ourselves. Um, I believe that emotional labor greatly affects all relationships that you have in your life, especially with me in my personal relationships. I mostly struggle with emotional labor when it comes to work. I find that um, implementing emotional labor or having to constantly mask negative emotions in a professional way is hard. Um, because in the workplace, that's one of the main things that you have to do. You have to remain professional at any place that you work at. Um, so especially at my job, you can't get upset. You can't let your true emotions show, because it wouldn't be it wouldn't be professional, and it wouldn't be acceptable. Um, so if something upsets you, whether that's with another coworker or with a customer or a patient, you really do have to work at controlling your emotions and redirecting them in a more positive way. So that's something that I've personally struggled with a lot, um, because I feel that I am a very emotional person. Even though I might have a hard time expressing it internally, I feel very emotional. Um, so at work, having to, juggle those emotions in your job can be pretty hard. Um, but I have learned and improved through experience a lot, so I think that makes it easier for me to have better or work at more at emotional labor with my personal or family relationships, because they do relate to each other in a lot of ways. So me being able to have high emotional labor at work is then does make it easier for me to have it in my home life or my personal life. um, Making sure that you are also being aware of your own needs so that you don't get burnt out if you're constantly, having a certain face or having um, a certain kind of filter around, in professional settings. I think that that kind of translates into your personal relationships, which is good to have. So, um, that's my response on emotional labor. For area 2, there was a statement given. It says people tend to have no problem talking about everyday or insignificant matters with a lot of patience, but when emotions come into play, it seems like crucial conversations just don't happen. I believe this statement to be very true. On page 179 of chapter 7, it discusses how avoidance can negatively affect our relationships. So when it in the statement, when it says when emotions come into play, it seems like those crucial conversations don't happen. That's very true, because a lot of people tend to avoid confrontation. A lot of people aren't confrontational, because they want to avoid certain emotions or certain difficult conversations. which can be difficult to deal with. But I think in the end, it's better to confront those certain situations that might be difficult to talk about. It's important for us to address our emotions and in a productive and positive way. Of course, if those emotions are intense or um, they could be extreme at sometimes, we have to find a way to communicate them so that someone else will understand, and we have to put it into their perspective as well and not just look at it through one perspective. We have to look at it through the other person's perspective as well. I personally struggle with avoiding certain conversations, so I do relate to that. And I do see with personal experience and observing others that everyone, probably everyone, struggles with avoiding having emotional conversations. But it's important that we express our emotions often, because it improves our communications and our relationships in the end. For area 3, it discusses about avoidance, that we learned in chapter 7. I think avoidance is probably the main negative emotional expression that I deal with. I often use avoidance in many situations because I tend to be someone who is emotional, but I don't like to always discuss my emotions. I get very anxious about it when it comes to personal emotions and having difficult conversations like we just discussed about. For example, I would often use avoidance, especially in romantic relationships, in order to protect my feelings and avoid the outcome, which I believe to be negative. Which I saw that it also relates to the fallacy of causation, and page 184 kind of ties into that avoidance for me as well. I avoid those conversations because I believe that the outcome is going to be negative either way. I feel insecure about my feelings, or not wanting to get hurt. So then I avoid having that conversation completely because I believe it's going to have one negative definitive outcome when that's not true. And that's something that I've learned a lot through growing up and having personal relationships. Is in the end, it's just not good to use avoidance all the time, um, because you're just hurting yourself and you're also hurting the other person as well. Um, so when I would use avoidance in this particular romantic relationship, in the end, it only prolonged this toxic relationship and it made things worse for myself and for the other person. Um, the 4 types of avoidance I engage in most was feigned ignorance, impervious response, sugarcoating, and placating. When I read the definitions of these 4 types of avoidance, it was really eye opening because I really understood that that was the way I was expressing my emotions, or I guess ultimately not expressing my emotions. So feigned ignorance is pretending that you don't know something when you do. So, or in this particular toxic relationship, I would pretend that I didn't know certain things that this person was doing because I didn't want to confront it. Impervious response is shutting down, not wanting to talk. That's the main thing that I would do. I just wouldn't want to talk about certain hurtful things or things that I felt that this person was doing or doing to hurt me, and it wasn't good. Sugarcoating and placating. So sugarcoating, of course, um, trying to make it seem like everything's okay when it's not. So these 4 types of avoidance severely impacted myself and this relationship negatively. In area 4, we talk about displacement and trapping. So displacement is when you kind of lash out at someone else when it has nothing to do with them, when your anger or your frustration isn't caused by this other person, so you're, incorrectly displacing your emotions. In regards to this toxic relationship, displacement was constantly used against me. With my significant other, his internal and external conflicts caused him to lash out at me over things that I didn't cause. But I realized that I also engage in displacement when I didn't address my emotions, causing my feelings internally to linger inside and then me lash out at other people like friends or family members that, didn't really deserve for me to take out my anger on them. So it was kind of like a bad cycle. He was displacing his emotions on me and I was displacing my emotions on other people. Um, Also trapping. I'm also guilty of trapping by asking, when I would ask him about a certain thing, ask him to be honest with me, and then get upset when he would be honest with me because I would already know the truth. So there was really no solution in that. And asking someone to be honest with you or asking someone to act a certain way, but then making them feel bad or making them regret acting that way is trapping. So I did realize that I also displayed those in trapping. Um, so overall, this so far chapter 7 has been um, um, very good in learning the different types of emotional expressions and how it does affect your personal relationships. Area 5 um, is when we watched the video of Jankowski in the baseball game. What happens when he returns to the dugout, and what communication behaviors are his teammates engaged in, and why? I noticed that his teammates ignore him. Whenever he hit the home run and then he came back to the dugout, his teammates completely ignored him. They didn't congratulate him. Usually, your teammates should be supportive and they should be, giving you a handshake or a hug and being happy for you. But they were the complete opposite. They were unintentionally or intentionally seemed to feel a certain way towards him. They were withholding approval, which I read about withholding on page 179. Um, they seemed to feel a certain way towards Jankowski, like anger or frustration, and that displayed when they were basically giving him the silent treatment. They were withholding approval, withholding congratulations. I don't know if this is because there was some internal conflicts going on, but they definitely seemed to be upset with him. For Area 6, what problematic communication behaviors do you see in Paul Sr. and Paul Jr.'s interaction in the video that we watched of the American Chopper TV show and the argument that the father and son had? That was definitely intense. They were I feel like there was a lot of communication errors in that argument that we watched. So first they're in a workplace. The conversation did not start out well. I didn't believe that they were communicating in a professional way. They were letting aggression and frustration take over. It seemed that the father was pretty upset with Paul Jr. about being late, about certain things that he was doing at work that he was not happy with, and so it seems like Paul Sr. was kind of letting these emotions and feelings linger inside of him, and probably this conversation is probably the first time he's addressing it with him. And so I feel that just letting his anger and letting his frustration build inside of him and then confronting him about it wasn't the best thing to do at that time. They obviously haven't discussed their personal issues in a practical way before this conversations, resulting in the explosive reaction and ultimately damaging their relationship. For Area 7, explain the fallacies that were listed. So it was the fallacy of approval, fallacy of causation, fallacy of overgeneralization, and the fallacy of perfection. So these four fallacies, we were to create a scenario with dialogue that depicts the fallacy influencing a conversation in some way. And then explain how the problematic communication behavior was effectively demonstrated. Also include what could happen if the characters chose better methods of communication. So using those scenarios, for the first one, the fallacy of approval. Fallacy of approval is when you seek everyone's exception to such an extent that you sacrifice your own needs and wants. So you are basically, I believe this is what you would call a people pleaser, which I also kind of relate to. So you're wanting you're wanting to please everyone. You're wanting everyone to, you want to have everyone's approval, but you're not taking into consideration your own needs and your own wants, and you're kind of neglecting yourself in order to please everyone, is the fallacy of approval. So the scenario that I used to demonstrate this fallacy could be, say when your family member asks you to attend an event that they want you to go to, but maybe say it's over the weekend, your family member asks you to come to this party that they're having, but you've had a very rough week and you're just not feeling very social. You feel like you need a break, and you just want to spend the weekend alone. However, you don't want to disappoint them, you don't want to upset them, so you ultimately end up agreeing to go anyways, and then you go to the party and maybe you might not even enjoy yourself, or you just don't want to be there because you're basically forcing yourself to be there because they asked you to. So instead of agreeing to go to the party that you don't want to go to, you could say, you could be honest with them and you could say, hey, I'm not really feeling up to it this time. I apologize, but I need just a little mental break for myself. And if your family member, is a good family member, then they'll understand, and they'll appreciate you for actually being honest with them instead of just saying what they want to hear or doing what they want to hear just because they asked you. Then it won't be genuine. So if I think the main thing is being honest and being clear about how you're feeling so that that person will know that you're being genuine. The next one, for a fallacy of causation. Fallacy of causation is when you're convinced that a communication choice will definitely result in a certain outcome. So I talked a little bit about it earlier, fallacy of causation. I think that's what I use a lot because I avoid confronting or avoid certain emotional conversations. One example can be if you avoid confronting your friend about something they did to upset you, and then it creates tension and your friend will not understand why you're acting differently. So kind of similar to the fallacy of approval. if your friend does something to upset you, but you're not addressing them, you're not addressing it and you're just pretending like everything is okay, kind of like sugarcoating, then they're not going to understand why you're acting differently, and they might take offense to it. They might think, oh, obviously you're mad at them, but you're not telling them why. They'll be confused, and there will just be a whole mix up of miscommunication. So instead of if they come to you and they ask you, hey, what's wrong, and you just say, oh, nothing, like, I'm fine, there's nothing going on, they're noticing that something is wrong with you. So instead of denying that, um you could say, you could tell your friend how you really feel, which will benefit your relationship in the long run, and again, they'll appreciate that you're being honest with them, and this will help your relationship grow and set boundaries. So if you were upset with them about some certain situation or something they did to upset you, then you can let them know, hey, this what how you said this a certain way upset me. Then they'll understand, and if they're a good friend and they value your relationship, then they'll try to change whatever it was that upset you. For the next fallacy, a fallacy of overgeneralization, is when you mistake or assume a single situation for a permanent thing. So if something happens or someone does something that might be out of the ordinary, or might be something you don't agree with, and then you just assume that it's always going to be like that without, stopping and thinking about it first. You're just assuming this generalization of the situation or the person. For instance, um, at work, one of your coworkers is it's a new coworker, so you don't really know them well. Say you have 2 or 3 other coworkers that you've been working with for a while, and you've all are very friendly and know each other good. But your new coworker is very shy, very quiet, and might not engage in your conversations that the two or the three of you guys have. You you might automatically assume, oh, well, they're rude, or they're too standoffish, or they don't like us, they don't want to get to know us. Instead of assuming that, you could maybe approach the coworker and say, hey, I noticed you're a little shy, a little quiet, you know um is there anything we can do to help, or is there any way that you feel? So you can approach that person and maybe see how they're feeling. Maybe they're just generally a quiet person, and you're just assuming that they're rude. So that would be an example of the fallacy of overgeneralization. um, the next one is fallacy of perfection. Fallacy of perfection is when you believe that it is essential to communicate perfectly all of the time. Basically, that I understood this fallacy as, if you make a mistake, then that's just the end of everything. Communication, your whole communication is horrible, and you can't accept that one mistake. Which I don't. I think that making mistakes is how we learn. It's how we grow. As long as you are effectively, or as long as you are trying your best to effectively communicate, is what really matters. And it's okay if you make a mistake, because things happen. Sometimes things out of your control. So in order to learn, or in order to grow and understand communication better, sometimes we have to make mistakes, or learn from your mistakes, or learn from other people's mistakes. So an example of the fallacy of perfection, um, I thought about a parent confronting their child about being dishonest with them about a certain situation. I'm not a parent myself. I don't have kids, but I am an oldest sibling. Um, and I can kind of see a little bit of a parent's point of view. Say for instance, if your child was dishonest with you about a certain topic, the parent might get um, upset with them because and ask them, why didn't you tell me the truth? Why didn't you talk to me about this? You're not communicating right. That, this is unacceptable. And the child might say, well, I just wasn't comfortable talking about it with you. Well, then that's true. So maybe instead of the parent just assuming that, that this is just wrong and the communication is all wrong and it's their fault for not telling them, maybe try to look at it from a different perspective and try to understand why the child is not being honest with them, and then maybe try and make it a little bit more comfortable for the child to talk to the parent about more issues or talk to them about their emotions more so that communication can be more smooth. Area 8 is about postponement, I language, validation, and gratitude. Uh, it was asked to show or explain 2 examples of how Paul Sr. and Paul Jr. could have communicated better. So going back to the video of the argument between Paul Sr. and Paul Jr., definitely postponement would have helped a lot. Um, if Paul Sr. would have postponed the conversation, he may have been able to get his feelings or his point across better than it was. He should have taken some time to reflect on his feelings towards his son and understand, why he's feeling this way or why he was upset, and then choose a better time to address the situation. Also, Paul Jr. could have used validation with his father's feelings. I felt like his son probably felt really attacked and just wanted to deny everything that his dad was saying. But if he maybe had just took a moment to understand why his father was feeling this way and validated his feelings, then maybe, the argument wouldn't have gotten so intense. For Area 9, we watched the scene in the movie The Breakup. It asked, what are some moments when the characters could have validated each other using one or more of the 4AI approaches? Would the conversation had been different if they were validated? One of the AI approaches that he could have used was the agreement. So I believe that he could have agreed with her perception of not helping her enough or not showing appreciation if he could at least had tried to understand or try to agree with her perception a little bit more instead of just denying it and just arguing about it. Maybe take some time to put himself in her shoes and try to agree with her perception. It would have made her feel like she was actually being listened to instead of just arguing. Also, for acknowledgement for her, she could have acknowledged his feelings more. I felt that yes, she was upset. She was wanting to explain, why she was upset and what he was doing. But also maybe taking some time to acknowledge his feelings as well, that he felt about how that she's always nagging at him about, his clothes or what he's doing or certain things that she was making how she was making him feel. Maybe if she would have acknowledged his feelings a little more, um, the conversation would have went a little bit better. For the last one, Area 10, the statement about apologizing with someone or apologizing to someone even if we don't agree. I believe this statement. I think that this statement I fully agree with. In trying to understand your partner or your friends or your family member's perspective shows that you truly do value the relationship between you and that person. Setting your pride aside is a huge thing. A lot of us do have um, a lot of pride, whether or not we want to admit it. And I think setting that aside in order to try to come to an agreement, or especially if that person is hurt or they feel offended by something that you did, even if you maybe not agree with it, trying to put that aside and apologizing to them is very important because you're validating them and it shows that you actually do value your relationship. It's important for me to receive an apology when I'm hurt because it's validating your feelings. I think validation is probably one of the most rewarding and nicest feelings to or emotions to experience from someone else, especially someone that you care about. It's important to have an apology when you feel hurt or offended, especially for me because it just shows that that person truly does care and they truly put themselves into your perspective, which is very good. So that is the end of my video for the chapter 7 response study assessment. Thank you for watching.